Welcome to the new people that have come into the room here in person, and welcome back to everybody online. I'm just going to hand straight over because we have very limited time. So I'm very pleased to introduce you all to Dr. Susannah French, formerly at the Australian National University, now independent consultant. So thank you.
All right, thank you so much. All right, you can hear me. We'll put the slides up. Yeah. Cool, thank you. All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here today. And I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders past and present. I also acknowledge the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples, the traditional custodians of the country where I live in Canberra, and work. And where much of my reflection and practice in inclusive education has taken place. So I'm Susannah, and I'm an independent, we'll call it a human behaviour insight and culture specialist. It has nothing to do with the acronym on Urban Dictionary. Do not look it up. I love New York, let's just say that. My work has long centered around understanding how people engage, learn, and thrive in systems that often weren't designed with diversity in mind. So to start us off, on the Menti screen, so to start us off, I'd like to hear your thoughts using Mentimeter. It's like, I'd just like you to respond to the question, like how you define academic excellence. So there's no like right answer. I'm sure there's plenty of wrong ones, but I'm really interested in how this concept really resonates in your teaching and institutional context. Is it okay if we actually share the Mentimeter screen so I can actually see the word clouds? That would be, yeah, I think that would probably be best. Yeah. Alrighty. Awesome. So yeah, just so if you're just using that, yeah, I've got the instructions here if you just want to use it now. And I've also got the code throughout all of it if you can see it. So I won't spend too much time. We've got the codes. So just think about like, how do you define academic excellence? So while you're mulling over this, and I'll probably revisit in the slides as well, because what I hope to explore with you today is that this idea that academic excellence and inclusivity are not competing priorities. They're not mutually exclusive. In fact, they are very deeply interdependent. And when we design for inclusion proactively and intentionally, we strengthen the very foundations of what we call academic rigor. So in many higher education settings, like some that I've worked at a lot, there's been a persistent narrative that positions academic rigor and inclusivity as opposing forces, where maintaining standards is seen as incompatible with making learning accessible. So you probably might have heard statements like, oh, you know, if we're making too many adjustments, we're lowering the bar. You know, that's fine in high school, but not at university. And then my personal favorite from a senior staff member that I will not name, oh, intersectionality and inclusion's all great and all, but there's a reason why we reward excellence and why we reward high-performing students and lecturers. So these are not just throwaway lines. They reflect a deeper institutional mindset that assumes that, so this is great. So I will just kind of move on. Okay, so pretty much, yeah, they reflect a deeper institutional mindset that assumes all students are either capable or in need, with very little space for the reality that all students at some point will need support of some kind. So if the structures are too rigid, like inflexible assessment types, inaccessible lecture formats, or punitive late policies, they really fail to account for the broad variability in how students learn, engage, and demonstrate knowledge. So what this mindset I feel overlooks is that these structures, they don't actually uphold excellence. They often obstruct it. And when we cling to these narrow definitions of what academic achievement is, we are excluding, you know, really amazing people who could succeed if the learning environment were designed with that variability in mind. So this is where UDL and UDL.3 offers this powerful alternative, because it's not just about it's not about lowering expectations, it's about designing learning environments that anticipate diversity right from the outset. So UDL recognizes that learner variability is not the exception, it's the norm, and it provides a framework for ensuring all students have those equitable access to challenging and meaningful engaging learning. So I'm not going to get too much into it because I'm just preaching to the choir, of course. But we need to think about, like, these are not add-ons. Like, these are the baseline for academic integrity and deeper, more equitable learning. So, so I'm thinking, like, reflecting on my own teaching, especially during my time as a lecturer, and when I also used to, do project management at the university, I was very acutely aware of so many constraints. So not just like the institutional policies, but the systems I often operated in. Sometimes it was a convener with a very rigid view of standards. Sometimes it's generational. Sometimes it's cultural. Look, there's a lot of other factors you're dealing with. And other times it was the broader university machinery, which permitted only superficial adjustments without actually challenging the structural barriers students faced. So as a casual tutor very early in my career, I was learning on the job, like a lot of us, striving to ensure that any student putting in the effort wasn't shortchanged due to factors within my control, at least. So it often meant navigating around cumbersome systems, trying to reframe assessments, offer informal scaffolding, and checking in with students outside class without, within reason, without compromising outcomes. Had I known UDL, it's like, I think there's a lot more I could have done. I see now with just a bit more institutional permission, or even just the language to advocate, I could have better supported not only my students, but also my academic colleagues. And that's why communities and conferences like this are vital, because it does provide that vocabulary to push back, not just at the curriculum level, but also in those quieter conversations with middle and senior managers who, with some effort, could enable real change. So it's really really critical for systems thinking. But let's just look at an example that I did. So it's like, and I've done this, I'm not sure if you've ever heard of the Free Passions assignment. The fabulous James Conner and Vanessa McDermott wrote a great paper on it. James Conner put this all together, and it's been doing this for quite a long time. And so I've taught like sociology students from ACU, ANU, and ADFA. And there's been, such diversity, domestic and international students, pathway students to Vents cadets. And there was students navigating English as a second language. There were first generation experiences or invisible disabilities, young carers, just so much diversity. And so the content I had, I was teaching was very theory heavy and very, very dense and impenetrable. And it could be alienating if prevented through very narrow and traditional formats. So one of the most impactful learning experiences I witnessed earlier in my career was that Free Passion assignment. And I was really honored to mark those. And the assessment granted students total creative autonomy. They could choose their topic, medium, and approach as long as they applied sociological theory to explore a question about human behavior. And the results were remarkable. Like students produced podcasts, video essays, fictionalized case studies, even original artworks and interactive installations. So the energy shift was palpable when they realized they were trusted to bring themselves into that work. However, alongside that creative surge, some students found the open-endedness incredibly stressful. So this is not just limited to the Free Passions assignment, and this is just a basic rubric that my colleagues and I did very long time ago because we really wanted the students to understand what they were doing. This open-endedness from students, it wasn't limited to that assignment. It was usually any time an assignment had more freedom and less structure. And a lot of students needed clarity on what success actually looks like. And it goes beyond just putting up an example paper, because sometimes the examples I still they didn't meet my standards, but that's a whole other discussion. But this was especially true for neurodivergent students. They were, and being neurodivergent myself, we rely on that predictability to manage that cognitive load and to just stay on track. So I've had colleagues who've disagreed with me, about they don't want to use rubrics for pedagogical reasons. But for a lot of these students, a well-structured rubric wasn't limiting at all. And to them, it was liberating because it made the invisible rules of academia visible and helping them understand expectations so they could meet them in their own way, with some assistance, of course. So it reinforces my view of UDL. So not just a framework for accessibility, but as a fundamental strategy for academic integrity. So a choice-rich assessment, of course, doesn't mean anything goes, but it also, we also think about how we got to offer multiple clear pathways to excellence. And so scaffolding without dictating and providing support without prescribing, form. So when I encountered conveners who rejected rubrics, believing they constrained creativity or assumed a deficit model, like I disagreed, and sometimes I won, sometimes I didn't. But in practice, that lack of structure disproportionately disadvantaged students striving the hardest. And it also left a lot of casual tutors like myself without a clear tool for explaining marks and increasing our vulnerability when students tried to appeal or complain. So I try to argue that a clear rubric protects both staff and students. So I didn't always have the authority to redesign assessment tasks from the top down, like in very limited spaces when I did become the lecturer. And even then there were constraints because I was sessional. So, but I could still enrich my teaching spaces with scaffolding. So I demystified grade descriptors, explained that a pass obviously is not a failure, but it's evidence of meeting a standard. You met a standard, you did, what was required, but this is what it, but we're also showing them this is what a credit would look like. This is what a distinction would look like, a high distinction. And it's not to foster competition. It's to build that confidence and clarity in the student. So it's not just academic skills, they're life skills. And if we don't start teaching in the first year or just undergrad, when do we expect these students to learn? So we design these assessments that are both accessible and excellent, creative and rigorous, and honoring those the diversity while maintaining standards. Because when students understand what's expected, and when we communicate this, we're not just helping them pass, we're also helping them belong. And that's also what's going to sustain them. So one practical strategy I did, and I probably could have put more, but it's like something that I did was that I would allocate like writing time for students. And so I wanted them to, without the computers, without, AI or anything like that, I wanted them to grasp that clear writing wasn't just a nice add-on, it was a vehicle for their ideas. And during my honors year, many years ago, asking my supervisor because I asked my supervisor, can you just overlook the messiness of my writing? Are my ideas good? And he actually responded, well, if I can't understand your writing, then it's just going to bury any good ideas you have. And that was a turning point for me. It actually changed my life because I realized then really understood that if the reader is working harder than the writer to understand the point, even the most original insight is going to get lost. So I shared this lesson every year with my first year students, especially when marking time was tight. Sessional staff at ANU, we were paid 20 minutes per 1,000 words. That meant we weren't really compensated for deciphering cryptic phrasing or filling in gaps in unclear arguments. And from my supervisor, like this really good advice that I got was to keep my sentences or aim to keep my sentences under 21 words or 21 words or under. And that constraint actually helped me edit more deliberately, avoid run-on sentences, and think more clearly about my communication. Like, what am I trying to communicate to the reader, right? So it transformed my writing, but it is disheartening that I didn't get that advice until honors. And that's why I wanted to break that pattern in my teaching by providing those tools, though these habits could still take root. So many of my students, of course, for all the reason I discussed earlier, like a lot of them are time poor. They're also working. Well, they're also, looking after their families. There's so much, or managing disabilities. So it's time poor, overwhelmed, or maybe not like aware of the support available, like what's actually available. Like they might understand in theory, but not really understand what these services do. So I made it a point at without taking up too much time to just embed it already into that tutorials, embed that scaffolding into the tutorials, rather than just, oh, you need to go seek study skills, because that's not going to mean a damn thing to them, especially when they're already at their wits' end. So rather, so I brought the help to them, and then at least they could be confident enough to, okay, I can go to a writing coach, the writing coach from academic skills and all of that. So I didn't just teach essay structure or citation conventions in isolation, but I started with what I saw as a foundational gap. I noticed that a lot of students didn't know how to read academic text with purpose. So I wanted them to understand that clarity in writing actually begins with clarity in thinking. And that clarity in thinking requires understanding the material they're referencing, because there's no point worrying about paragraph flow if your argument is built on misinterpreted or cherry-picked theory. So we slow it down and we use supplementary tools in our classes, whether it was academic blogs or YouTube like things, or even just like something I saw and I was like, okay, now let's use Marx's theory to analyze this. Let's use Durkheimian theory to analyze this very specific cultural incident. So anything that helped break down those big ideas. And it was also just important to reassure them that struggling to understand text written in another country, in another era, often in a translated language 50 years ago, was not a personal failure. It was normal, you know? But what was expected was to persist and to find a way to make that theory meaningful and usable. Because if they didn't understand what they were reading, there was no way they could apply it. And if they're not applying, what are we really assessing? So, and I'm for one, just did not want to read another misinterpreted paper that, yeah, like Marxist feminism is not a thing. It's like, come on. So just like something to just sort of do, just to think about what's one strategy you already use that makes learning both rigorous and inclusive. So yeah, no pressure there. But I do think about like, so just thinking about how we embed support as well, is that many of my students, you know, there's just, we just got to think about like, you know, with UDL, like how is it, like how do students present knowledge, you know? And we got to think about how we teach them to acquire it as well, because not every student walks in knowing how to navigate a university library database or how to book one-on-one writing consultation. So I wanted to introduce those skills explicitly. So I brought like annotated articles into class and all of that. One of the most effective activities that I did was using de-identified sample essays, some from past cohorts and others that I'd written myself and intentionally messed up. I wanted students to feel safe enough to critique a text without fear of getting it wrong. So my own flawed writing modeled that vulnerability. So I split the class into groups, like one analyzed the introduction, another another couple of groups would look at a body paragraph and another looked at the conclusion. And each group would evaluate their section. So what was working, what was missing, and crucially, whether they could guess the essay's overall argument just from that isolated paragraph. And this activity consistently produced two important insights. So first, that academic writing is cumulative. Each section should echo to support the whole. And second, it's often much easier to identify vague or weak writing in somebody else's work. I mean, I got red to fill for some of the shit I put in, including my favorite line, humans have been living a long time in what we generally call society. And it's like, yeah, it's so easy to trash somebody else writing it, but not when it's yourself. So, so really identifying that weak writing is somebody else's work than their own. And that realization sparked some powerful moments of reflections like, okay, damn, am I doing the same thing with my own essays? And it wasn't just about grammar or structure. It was about cultivating that critical awareness that underpins academic integrity. This is so cool. Thank you so much. So let's make the hidden curriculum visible. So like a lot of my teaching has aimed to illuminate what we call the hidden curriculum. So like Raywin Connell has discussed it and so many great authors as well. So we think about the unspoken rules, expectations, and academic norms that many students are never explicitly taught. So it's not fair to assume that they're going to intuitively understand how all these things work as well. So if you really, really want to level the playing field and think about how all of these, these things are interconnected in terms of assessment standards, we've got to stop treating support as something reactive or optional. So we really need to design it into the very fabric of our teaching. And that's what I try to aim to do, not to just pass, but to get them to help them see that they belong here, that their success is possible, and that the system absolutely can be made more transparent, more humane, and more just. And it also helped me like retain a lot more of what I would consider the at-risk students. I think that's an awful term, but approaching university like it's a game that you decode. And I made it my mission to help students understand these rules. Whether they took those lessons on, by that point, that was on them. but I did my best, you know, conscious clean, hands clean, all of that. And I also needed to make sure that the text, you know, understand the text. It was not optional. They needed to understand and apply that theory if they wanted to succeed in the course I was teaching. But if you're not connecting it to something meaningful, they're far less likely to engage, or they become overwhelmed and disengaged entirely. And another area that I reflected on a lot was the tutorial participation, because it's measured by how often, you know, the student talks as well. But it can take many forms, like note-taking, contributing to group tasks, being attentive. So we also talked about like how murky that is. And I mean, there's a lot of, you know, worry about it being like about spoon feeding and all of that. But the thing is, everyone needs training wheels at some point, unless you were actually could get on the bike straight up. That's good on you. I was not that lucky. I was not that coordinated. But yeah, it's not about lowering expectations, but it's about providing that scaffolding they need to order to meet those high standards, you know, because we do really want to reward excellence, but if we can remove preventable barriers, that can help. But I do find the scaffolding will help a lot, because I feel like they will find a lot more confidence. And I noticed that with the exercises, that they weren't relying on wholesale riffing from other sources they didn't understand, or even like, you know, and they were less reliant on AI as a result, or at least used AI a little bit better because they knew what they were doing and actually understood the work. Because, you know, just understanding like why it's important to really get it and not just, you know, just rely on other external things. Because I notice that when I'm relying too much on other people's words, I don't understand the subject matter. So just one, I think we're just, yeah, I mean, we might not have time, but you could probably do it. Just think about what you've done, just one thing that's helped you retain students, like you genuinely believed it. So while you're talking, you know, we think about offering those participation outcomes, redesign those rubrics with UDL in mind, use institutional levers. That's my favorite. Use the, you know, go through your disability action plan, all of these other equity plans, use the language against them. Maybe it's like a little bit harder to say no, but most likely they'll blue screen that you know their policy better than them. Anyway, so yeah, that's the end of the session now. This is my lovely little thing. I thought so long about it. I won't speak on that. But yeah, if you want to keep the conversation going, add me on LinkedIn. I don't know what I was thinking when I did that LinkedIn handle, but it's true, so I left it. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Susannah, thank you very much. I feel more awake after your presentation. Thank you for your energy and the passionate approach that you have, and for sharing that with us. That was amazing. So if anyone has any questions online, I might just go straight to the Slido. If anyone's forgotten how to get to Slido, I'm sure Kylie's put it in the chat, or don't forget it's on your name tags if you want to go add something. And lots of great comments and questions are coming through. So I'll just ask a couple, if that's okay, from the Slido. So how did the students handle the rubric for the Free Passion project?
Yeah, there was no rubric. That was the problem. So it was a lot of scaffolding, hand-holding in the tutorials as well, because the main thing I wanted to stress is that you still need to understand the theory. And James Conner really meant it. This wasn't some Mickey Mouse finger painting assignment. He actually wrote that in the course outline at the time. I'm like, wild. I could never get away with that. But yeah, so it was really important to do it, because it's like, okay, have you at least implemented theory? Did you at least pick, you know, a solid case as well? And we were meant to workshop that in tutorials, because the thing is, like, some of the, like, and when we got random like assignments, so I didn't even get to teach my own students. So sometimes it's like, okay, that was not sociological theory. You used evolutionary biology to explain why women think men are handsome, and that was fine. But I'm just like, damn, you really missed it. But it was not about shaming them. It's like, look, come back to us. And when I've had other assignments that didn't have rubrics, it was like, really just pushed. It's like, you know, especially if it was literature reviews, it's not about your argument. What did you find? And actually scaffolding what a literature review actually is. And we ended up getting like the actual quality of the assignments did increase by having that scaffolding in place.
Thank you. And this is just a great question. So 1 minute you've got to answer it. Morgan Harris, thank you for asking. Creating space for students to learn to read and write academic writing in STEM programs can be difficult. What strategies could we use in engineering to introduce these concepts? 1 minute.
1 minute. Yeah, so I'm very much coming from that humanities base, so I'm not well placed to speak on the STEM things, but you also got to, all right, what's actually something that you can do to sort of break it down, and and sometimes it might be like those small group works to actually scaffolding, because sometimes you need to kind of like, okay, one thing at a time, and a group would look at one thing and then we all come back together and then we see the whole and we actually see like, oh, okay, so this is how this works. This is how the strings pull in. So unfortunately, I'm not sure if I can help you there because STEM is not what I do. I know make things, but when it comes to dense theory and helping students actually get through it and pass sociology, especially when a lot of them who come from STEM think it's a bludge, it's actually pretty tricky.
I wish we had more time. That was absolutely wonderful. Please, everyone, go to Slido. Keep adding your comments and your questions. Otherwise, let's all thank Susannah and morning tea upstairs.